do my introduction. I'm Rachel Storm. I'm here with Dr. Tony Frank, the Chancellor at Colorado State University. Today is September 2nd, 2021. And we're here today to talk about the National Western Center. Thank you very much for joining us and for being willing to talk about this with us. So let's kind of start off with, what is your relationship to the National Western Center complex, and how that relates to you and what you do and things like that?
Sure. So I've had an affiliation with the National Western Stock Show for quite some time. I'm on the board of directors of the Western Stock Show Association. I'm also the CSU representative to the National Western Center Authority Board, which is the group that now governs this new National Western Center complex that the voters of the city and county of Denver, as well as the voters of Colorado, have invested so heavily in. And as well, I think, just in terms of heritage, the partnership between CSU and the National Western Stock Show, the Western Stock Show Association, if you will, goes back to literally when the first stock show was held in Denver. As the folks at the stock show like to remind me, back then, the CSU president paid students a quarter to go down to Denver and attend the stock show. And they keep asking me if we're going to return to the days when we're paying students to go. And I keep telling them that a few things have changed. The relationship is still important, but perhaps using taxpayer dollars to pay students to go there is not on our agenda. So it's been a great partnership for CSU and the stock show over the years, for a land-grant university that has, as one of its foundational elements, this commitment to agriculture. It's a very logical partnership. And in today's iteration of this new National Western Center complex, we believe that foundational pillar around agriculture combines with connections to the rapidly growing metropolitan Front Range of Denver. We believe there are some important urban-rural connections that can be made across that, and we think it fits very much with our role and mission.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. So what does the redevelopment of the National Western Center mean to CSU? What's going to come out of this? What is it going to do that it hasn't been able to do before?
Yeah, so maybe let's take just a step back. CSU, for as long as I've been around the institution, which goes back into the early 1990s, has always sort of been searching for the right way to display our brand more prominently in Denver. I don't think, if you study demographics at all, you can understand why that is. The state capital, the heart of the metropolitan area, the largest growing, most rapidly growing part of Denver, all of those reasons. If you're a modern research university and your brand isn't prominent in that part of your state, you've probably missed a trick. But for us, the question was always how best to do that. There was the Aurora campus that's already here with the University of Colorado at Denver, Metropolitan State University of Denver, Denver Community College. It didn't seem to us that there was a real strong demand for traditional face-to-face education. Certainly our online presence of CSU Global Campus is in Denver, but by definition, as an online presence, not a lot happens around your brand. So I would say that we had sort of that was just a background conversation of thinking for us. When the discussions came up about redeveloping the stock show, and the stock show actually approached us and said, we would like to have CSU consider being a 24/7 sort of anchor tenant or partner in this redevelopment. That seemed really attractive, right? Because we had connections with the stock show on so many different fronts. This wasn't a campus that we were envisioning as lecture halls filled with students or dormitories or granting college degrees, that sort of thing. This was a campus that we viewed more as a portal where we could take these physical facilities and take what's happening on university campuses, particularly around the areas of food and water and health, which are squarely in the center of the target for what a land-grant university does and are clearly great global challenges of our time. We could take a lot of those things that were happening on our campus and we could deliver them to urban audiences, to audiences who wanted to come in and see that material and engage with it. What's the cutting edge around water reuse and recycling in an urban setting? Conversely, what are the new precision agriculture techniques that are cutting water use in agriculture? And it gets at that, all of these get at that concept of taking the or out of our questions. What's more important, urban water or agricultural water? If we answer that question, we failed. We have to do both. And so that's one of the main underpinning rails of our vision for this, is that it focuses on the and between these important issues rather than the or. The other thing around bringing us to that place and in these facilities is we thought that portal would also allow K-12 students to look forward through the portal at college, right? So I'll just bear with me and I'll give you a quick example here. The gold standard for graduation rates is a 6-year graduation rate. Because now there a lot of students take a year or two that works a little more to get their way through. So the babies born in Colorado in 1997 would have finished their 6-year graduation cohort this past May. So if you go back to 97, there were 56,500 babies born in Colorado. 33% of those graduated from college. 24% went to college but didn't finish. Okay, so there's an area where higher ed can really improve. When we've got our hands on those young people, we need to help make sure more of them get to the finish line. But the remaining percentage, 6% could have gone to college but didn't choose to. And I think it's about 37, 38% weren't qualified to go to college, including 11% that didn't graduate from high school. Now, it's very tempting for higher ed to say, that's not our problem. That's a K-12 problem, you know. But the simple fact is, if we were designing an education system today for the 21st century, we would never put a hard stop between high school and college. You wouldn't have two separate systems. And we know that a big problem with a lot of those kids, especially kids coming from first generation families where neither parent has been to college, is that somewhere around junior high, the parents start to get the idea that I don't think I'm going to be able to afford college. And so by the time we reach out to a young man or a young woman as a junior in high school and start to say, hey, have you thought about college? We've got to overcome 3, 4, 5 years of subliminal messaging that college may not be right for them. What we thought we could do with Spur as a portal is integrate every K-12 kid along the Front Range into these programs. So think experiential co-curricular activities that are plugged directly into the lesson plans. This isn't a, hey, we're going to watch a film today. You know, these are really tightly plugged into what they're learning and being taught by their teachers in the curriculum. But it should have that wow factor. It should have that experiential. The kid should come home getting off the bus just bubbling. You know, you're not going to believe what I saw today. I saw a cow with a hole in its stomach where you could actually look in. I mean, if that doesn't get your attention, what's going to? And all the different things. And if you could do that throughout the entire lifetime of a K-12 student, I think we could really move the needle on the number of those kids who are motivated to prepare for college, believe there's a place in college for them, believe there are programs to fund college for them and want to go. And fundamentally, that's the other half of that portal. We want to take what's happening on campuses and push it out to people. And we want to take this group of people that's not being as exposed to college as we think they need to be and show them what's going on and give them every opportunity to plug in and say, when the right time comes, I want to go. Now, we hope they go to CSU or CSU Pueblo or CSU Global, but mostly they just need to go because our society needs each and every one of them.
That's fantastic. That's funny that you mentioned the cow with the hole in the stomach, because before I went back into school, I worked for the USDA at a seed gene bank in Ames, Iowa.
Yeah.
And but we had NADC out there, the National Animal Disease Control, and they had the cow with the hole in the stomach. And whenever we did science fairs, we would take seeds, and we had come up with a game where you could like we made like little squeezers where you could squeeze it and smell it and see if you could figure out what seed it was by what it smelled like. And we could never compete with that cow because it's a cow with a hole in the stomach. I mean, how do you compete with a cow with a,
Yep,
hard to do
exactly.
but yeah, that was what popped into my head, and then you said it and I was like, oh. But yeah,
Well, and the three buildings that we've got out there, there's one around food, one around water, one around health. The one around health has a lot of these veterinary type. So all of these will have a component that is essentially, think Denver Museum of Nature and Science. I mean, not the museums when I was a kid where you walk in and there's a guard looking at you to make sure you don't touch anything. The sorts of museums where where kids come in and they're encouraged to touch stuff and handle it and get excited about it and stimulate that love of learning. So there are going to be these rotating exhibits. I mean, the ruminatomy, of course, will have a place in that just because of what it does to a young kid's mind. But equally impressive on that, there are these underwater treadmills that they run horses on now, and they're hooked up to a full respiratory gear so you can measure, like Olympic athletes, all their respiratory outputs and whatnot. If you've ever seen a horse running on an underwater tread, it'll get your attention. I mean, I've seen it a few times, and I was a large animal vet, but I'll tell you, my pupils still dilate every time I see it. And I think those sorts of things, being able to watch what veterinarians are doing in our partnership with the Dumb Friends League, being able to bring the Temple Grandin Equine Therapeutic Riding Center and what it does with autistic patients or PTSD patients, and being able to see that. I think going into the hydro building and seeing the latest water recycling and reuse techniques, or being able to go in back where you're opened up to the South Platte River, but that backside of the building has got landscape architecture exhibits that are lit at night showing all of Colorado's main watersheds. I mean, these are going to be high wow factor experiments. In the Terra building, there's going to be an area focused on the international research of the university, where kids can go up to this essentially big screens and kiosks, touch a spot on the map of the world and find out what CSU researchers are doing in that area and how that relates to what's happening right back here at home in Colorado.
That's amazing. I mean, presumably the buildings will be very active during the National Western in January every year. Will these be year-round kind of things that are going on all the time, or will they be regularly open, or will they just be open for special occasions?
No, we anticipate them being open regularly. I mean, sort of our vision for it is during the day, you're going to have a lot of K-12 traffic through there. If this lives up to our expectations, that will be always a big factor. Evenings, you can imagine a whole series of urban agriculture, urban extension programs in the Terra building. There's a demonstration kitchen, a tasting kitchen in there. There are greenhouses for those sorts of facilities. There's a lot of ability to offer policy-based seminars and discussions, not just around water, but around conservation more generally and sustainability through the Hydra building. As we mentioned, the partnership with the Denver Dumb Friends League and the Equine Therapeutic Riding Center, those are facilities that will be open and operating regularly. There'll be some special things during stock show. We'll certainly want to put our best foot forward to all those sets of eyeballs that come walking through the facility. But if we're not open and operating virtually every day of the year down there, we won't have achieved our vision for the facility.
Fantastic. So you've already touched on this a little bit, but the next question is about redeveloping the area and what that, the question is, what do you think redeveloping this area will mean to the future of Denver and of Colorado? But maybe contextualizing that in like CSU and how CSU is going to fit into that future.
Yeah, so I mean, right now, perhaps more so than in any time in our lives, redevelopment is a two-edged sword, right? I mean, we ought to be honest about that and talk about that. The one narrative is pretty easy for us to express, and that's a narrative that these neighborhoods of Globeville, Elyria, and Swansea have always been immigrant neighborhoods, right? And initially, they were the European immigrants that worked the meat packing plants and the extraction industries that were located along the river and the railroads and those sorts of things. They have always remained immigrant neighborhoods, but they became isolated over time by essentially modern infrastructure, right? So when I-70 went in, it carved a swath through these neighborhoods that you had to find a way across. Bridges didn't keep up with the river, so the river was a natural barrier. Rail lines came through and further carved these up, and so they became a little more isolated. And as Denver grew and prospered, these neighborhoods were cut off from that, from a lot of that economic prosperity and investment. It's easy then to say, all right, we're going to open that up for redevelopment. But the other side of that coin is, how do we protect the people who live in these communities? How do we make sure that people, by elevating real estate values and prices, aren't forced out of their homes, that gentrification doesn't become a major factor around what's happening here? In short, how do you deliver the benefits of opening up and reconnecting these neighborhoods, which dropping and capping the interstate and putting these 2 new bridges in over the river and all of these sorts of things, relocating the rail lines, all of those offer that opportunity, but you want to capture those positives without allowing the negatives to displace people who rightfully have a reason to expect that these are their homes and their neighborhoods and their communities, and they should be expected that way. That's from the very first moments we started talking about that, that's been on CSU's mind. Now, I won't sit here and tell anybody we have cracked the code on this. We know how to deal with economic development without any risk of gentrification. If I did that, I'd probably have a book written on it somewhere, and I'd be out on some speaking circuit. I don't know that anyone has completely cracked that code, but it's going to take all of our best thoughts and thinking and engagement around it. I know the mayor and the city council, the council people who represent this district, have always been very concerned and plugged into that. Right now, what we're working around is this anchor institution framework, which is a current construct that says to big employers, when you come into an area, there are things you can do that help deliver benefits to that community and minimize risks. Are part of your purchasing locally sourced? Are part of your employment practices locally oriented? Are you embedded in the community in philanthropic endeavors? What are all the sorts of things you're doing there? And I think the folks that CSU has that are on the ground in these communities fit every bit of that. They have bought into that anchor institution framework passionately, and I'm really proud of the work they're doing, whether that's Bruce Randolph schools and a scholarship opportunity for kids that live in the zip codes of Globeville, Elyria, Swansea, whether it's a vaccination clinic that we originally started for pets that we now do in conjunction with the CU Medical School. So it's a kind of a human and animal vaccination clinic. There's a whole series of things. We want to be known as people who live in this community. We're a part of that community, and we want it to thrive and to be a part of that.
Thank you. So this is sort of kind of our take your whole idea and put it into a single thing kind of question. That is, if we were to take a single photo representing CSU and its relationship to the National Western Center, past, present, or future, what would that photo be of and why?
Yeah, there's a couple I can think of, but I think the one that really comes to mind would be a K-12 student, maybe high school, let's say high school. So it's now you're going to invite me to make it complicated. I'll do a split image. On one side, you've got a high school student who's from rural Colorado, who's in 4-H and who's at the stock show showing their steer. That's the classic CSU Land Grant University, rural Colorado stock show connection. The other half of that screen that I'd put with it would be a kid on a school visit to the stock show at the Ag Adventure exhibit. And they're inside and they're, whether it's the petting zoo, with the baby Cam the ram, or whether it's, something about where your food comes from. Here's maybe somebody who has spent their entire life growing up in a city who's really having their eyes opened to this whole new world of where their food comes from. And hopefully then if we do our job well and capitalize on that half of the image, we bring those two worlds together and we get away from questions, again, going back to our or questions, we get away from things like, well, what matters more to us? Animal welfare and how animals were raised for human consumption, or if, and how we meet global protein demand. That can't be an or question. It's got to be answered with an and. Modern agriculture wants to do that, but it can't do it without effective partnerships with urban communities. And that all effective partnerships always start with communication. Whenever we start talking and listening to each other, we get the answer right a lot more than we get it wrong.
That's great. Yeah, it seems like a simple question. It is really a very complicated question.
Yeah, it is indeed. It is indeed.
So those are the basic questions that they wanted me to kind of cover. We do have some like just personal history questions, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about like
Sure.
How you got to where you are, what got you into, animal science in the first place, and like maybe talk a little bit about that. We'd love to hear it.
So I grew up on a type of farm in northern Illinois that doesn't really exist anymore. Back in the day, they were the type of farm. Everybody had about 400 acres, and in rough terms, they were split into 4 quadrants, and you did 4-year crop rotations. You grew oats one year while the alfalfa was getting seeded. Then the second year there was alfalfa. Then you put soybeans on that, and then corn. And then you started the cycle over to restore the nitrogen for the corn the 4th year, and you rotated among your 4 patterns. We didn't have what we would term today ag inputs, the fertilizers and the pest control chemicals and techniques. So that sort of rotation really mattered. The technology wasn't nearly as good for harvesting the grains efficiently. And so after you finish picking the corn, for example, you would first take the cattle out into the field. When the cattle were done with it, you'd bring the swine out into the field. When the swine were done with it, you'd let the chickens, go out over the field. And all of that was designed to keep going down and getting more and more of the grain and reusing it and putting it back into a different form of animal protein, at the same time fertilizing and restoring that soil. If you talked about farming like that today, you would use phrases like regenerative agriculture, and it would sort of be cutting edge, which is, to me, proof that if you stick around long enough, everything becomes cool again. It goes through that cycle. But anyway, coming out of that farm background, and we had, probably around 20 dairy cows and, maybe 20 or 30 cow-calf pairs, and we would buy feeder cattle, every winter to feed, and we had, probably, a dozen or so sows and some sheep, and you'd buy feeder pigs as well, and ducks and chickens, and it was a menagerie, right? It was an agricultural Noah's Ark. So out of that background, when I went off to college, what I thought about studying was something that could bring me back to that farm. And so I was interested in veterinary medicine. So studied biology as an undergraduate. I wanted to go to the University of Illinois because my brothers had gone to Illinois State, and by God, I was going to do something different. That's the level of crack thinking that went into that educational decision. And along the way, I got offered some scholarships at Wartburg College where my mother had graduated. And so it ended up being less expensive for me to go to Wartburg. I actually wanted to go to U of I. And my father, who had always been my advocate that a private school would be too expensive, once it became cheaper, he thought it would be wonderful for me to go to that private school. So I went to Wartburg and got a great liberal arts education, fought it every step of the way, but still got a great education. Went on from there to University of Illinois, where I did my DVM. I was still planning to go back to the farm when I met this girl who was in her senior year and I was in my junior year. And we started dating, and I took her back and introduced her to my parents and showed her the farm and talked about the type of practice I hoped to have. And she wished me luck and was sure I'd be happy there. And so I needed a plan B. She was in practice in Indianapolis the next year, and I managed to secure a residency and PhD slot at Purdue. I finished up my PhD at Purdue, did residencies in pathology and toxicology, worked briefly in the pharmaceutical sector of what was then the pharma division of Dow Chemical. We moved to Oregon, and I spent 5 years on the faculty at Oregon State in the vet school. Moved to Colorado in 1993. A couple years later, agreed to be an acting department chair for 4 months only while we did a search. Something went wrong along that path. I wound up staying as department chair, developed a very special relationship with the dean of the vet school, James Voss, for whom the veterinary teaching hospital is named now up there. Jim asked me to be his associate dean for research, and I said yes to that. I had thought that was an or, it was an and, so I wound up keeping the old job. I always tell people now, make sure you understand what you're saying yes to. That introduced me to sort of central administration at the university, and a couple of years later, when the VP for research retired, he asked me to apply for that job, and Al Yates offered me that job in 2000. When Al stepped down, the new president, Larry Penley, asked me to serve as his provost and executive VP. And when Larry stepped down, the board asked me to move over and serve as president. After a few years, they asked me to serve as chancellor. That was another one of those and things that I should have been more careful about. So I did both of those jobs for 5 years. And then in 2019, stepped down from the presidency at the Fort Collins campus and have served since then as the chancellor of the CSU system.
I have to ask for my own curiosity, because my PhD is on the future farmers of America and agricultural capitalism. I have to ask if you were you in 4-H or FFA when you were in?
I was in both. And I was more active in 4-H than in FFA. It was a more active organization in that particular county of Illinois. And my dad was one of the club leaders. There were about 4 families that rotated, the leadership of that. Served as I think every officer you could have in that club. We were the Compton Brooklyn Beavers. That was the name of our 4-H club.
I love the 4-H club names. They're just so great.
Yeah, exactly.
My best friend is a club leader for her daughter, who's a senior this year, and has been for like 6 or 7 years, and her daughter's on the county council and things like that now. But one of the clubs that's no longer in existence in their county was the Luther Lively Lads. And I just love them. The names are great. I just love the names of the 4-H clubs. They're just
I used to do this when I was president. I used to do a summer tour around Colorado and hit a lot of the extension offices, NAG experiment stations and whatnot. And the second year I was in it, I thought, you know what I'll do? I'll time this to be in these towns when their county fair is going on, so I can visit during the fair. And I got there and I had forgotten how during the fair, the extension agent is like a man with paper pants at a forest fire. They are just, it's a crazy time for them. And virtually every one of them would say to me, didn't you used to be in 4-H? And I'd say, yeah. And they go, then don't you know better than to be here this time of year? So
like, you're most active.
Oh, absolutely. That was, and I would usually get assigned, they would assign me some very well-meaning, but often painfully shy 4-H student to give, the CSU president a tour of the county fair.
The kid who is not doing any of the like super active stuff. They're there. They're committed to being there. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. And to them, the fact that it was the CSU president wasn't all that impressive. They were just like,
You're an adult.
here's some adult from out of town that I have to take time away from my friends to walk around the fair with. So
I have to say, I'm doing working on a pilot project with the Routt County 4-H and CSU Public Lands, and I'm the oral history consultant, but they're collecting oral histories with Centennial ranchers. And that's just been a really fun project working with the agent there. And we've been doing the project for almost a year now. And it's a really fun project to get to meet the kids. I've met them, a few times when we've done kind of instruction kind of stuff. And I've mostly met the council for the county. So it's the kids that are the most active. They have great questions and they're really engaged and they want to learn about these ranches. And I've always found them to be great groups of kids. So
very cool.
It's very fun. So yeah. So I guess just to kind of close things out, unless you have other specific things you'd like to talk about, just to kind of close things out. You've talked a lot about the big picture, and also some of the you've talked about the small picture of things too. So I really have a good feeling for who your target demographic is. Who are the people that they're going to be encountering when they come out get off their bus, and who are they meeting? Is CSU expanding staffing? Is it going to be faculty moving back and forth, students moving back and forth? Who are they going to encounter when they go out?
Right. It's going to be a little of all of that, right? We're hiring some new people. If this K-12 education connection is as robust as we believe it could be, that's got to be someone who comes from an education background, who's used to working with teachers, who's able to understand how you mesh these things into curriculum. There are times and places for these sorts of activities and other times where they don't work as well. And so we need somebody who can sit down with teachers, plan that out, articulate a compelling vision for the idea, but also not sell something that's just not going to work for a teacher. Right. So those are sort of new positions and new staff. At the same time, when you think about the small animal clinic with the Deaf or Dumb Friends League, those will be veterinary students from the Fort Collins campus who will be coming down and working in that facility. The equine therapeutic riding, Temple Grandin Equine Therapeutic Riding Center, those will probably be students from the Equine Sciences program on the Fort Collins campus. Remains to be seen how we're going to staff various K-12 exhibits as people come through. My guess is those are people we're going to hire and train to sort of be staff, as you'd think of the staff at a Denver Museum of Nature and Science, that are knowledgeable about their area and their topic. And so there's a place again for new and for a focus on local employment, because we want the students coming through here to see people who are like them. We're all in this country dealing with issues of diversification that we have put off for too long. And this is an opportunity for us to really embrace that in a powerful way, and one that I fully intend for us to get right. So there'll be new people. There'll be some people coming down from our programs. And then we want to leave some flex, right? With new buildings like this and new opportunities, the one thing my experiences as an administrator tell me is there will be fantastic ideas that are born out of this that we won't have thought of. And it's been an important piece for us not to program this thing so fully that when that next great idea comes up, we're not able to say yes. That we have to say, well, there's no room in the inn for that. So we want to make sure that whatever that idea is, if that's a partnership with CU's medical school around the health aspect, great. Let's see what that looks like. If there's a connection, with Metro around some of their culinary programs and the connections to food and the food programs that are here, great. Let's have an opportunity to expand that. And in the end, I think these facilities should have enough of a wow factor, should be enough of a draw that we want to use them to leverage outcomes. And the outcomes we all share. The programs that connect the facilities and those outcomes, I think we'll see where those go. I'm happy with what we've done to start with, but I would bet if we come back in 10 years, they won't be exactly what we dreamed of.
Right. So
There's I'm sorry, I should add one thing to this that I've left out. There is a virtual reality component to this
oh, cool.
that's in the Vita building, the health building. So if you see the room right now, it looks spectacularly unimpressive because it's just an empty room, right? And even if we take, there's like 20 sets of, that's more than that, because they're groups. But all of a sudden from the ceiling, you've got 30 or 40 sets of virtual reality goggles hanging down. Okay, that doesn't look that impressive either. And even if you fill the room with people and they've got the goggles on, once again, you think, okay, great. But you really have to do these to experience them. You can take an MRI image of a human body and you can put it into this system, and the people there can do. Are you old enough to remember Fantastic Voyage?
I teach a class called History of the Future, and I actually
okay
the students. So yeah.
Perfect. So you can, in this virtual reality thing, and there's a guide to do it with you. You can go inside the body, and you can go anywhere in it. You can go inside the heart. You can see what's going on. And it's not just, yeah, it's got a great wow education factor, and yes, it's got other things like that. But there are some practical aspects to this. The companion facility in Fort Collins, we've had brain surgeons, neurosurgeons in Japan use that facility so that they can actually visualize the blood flow around a tumor they're about to remove and operate on. So they can actually see in 3D, okay, I've got 18 little vessels that I need to tie off here, rather than just doing the surgery and going, are we still bleeding somewhere? Really, really impressive. I think that sort of thing, I walked away from that the first time I did it. I thought, okay, virtual reality, some cool new gaming thing, that's neat, whatever. I walked away from that the first time going, if we can get kids inside that with the right experiences that are tied into their curriculum, we're going to blow them away.
Yeah. That's amazing. Amazing. So I'm sure that on the first day that it opens, you will have all sorts of formal chancellor things to do. But once you are freed from all of your, ribbon cuttings and chatting with people and so forth, what are you going to do first? What do you want your first day to look like, where you're freed from your obligations and you're just going to wander around the facility? What are you going to do?
The main thing I want to see, I want to be in that VR room when the kids take off the goggles. I just want to hear what it sounds like, because my hope is it'll just bubble. It'll just pop with all of the, did you see that?
That's fantastic. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. There's nothing better. Every year I judge National History Day and I just walk away. It's like Christmas. It's better than, you walk away and it's just like excitement. And all of a sudden you just see that light bulb click on in those kids and you're just like, yeah.
If you're an educator and that doesn't get your heart beating faster, you're in the wrong profession.
Right. That's fantastic. Is there anything else you want to share with us? I've finished up my questions. So.
No, I'm all good. As usual, I blab too much. Sorry about that.
No, I'm a chatter too. As the person, when I told my parents I got this position, my mom's like, you're going to just sit and listen to people and not do any talking. I'm like, I'm a talker.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom. She knows though. But no, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I've really enjoyed our conversation and getting to hear how much I'm so excited to get to go myself when everything goes open, and to also just kind of sit in those rooms and watch how the kids react, because that kind of stuff's fantastic. So
we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Have a nice afternoon.
Take care.